Once you get into coffee, and I mean like really into coffee, it often isn't too long before you start researching coffee burrs. Now, these are coffee burrs right here, and they're the actual surfaces that do the cutting and grinding inside coffee grinders like this. And once you get used to tasting a lot of coffee, different burrs in your grinder can actually have a pretty dramatic effect on the taste of the coffee, as well as how brews perform across different brew methods. And it's usually not very long after you start researching burrs that you come across SSP burrs. They come in different sizes, made in Korea. These are 64mm size, and SSP burrs are probably the most common aftermarket burrs amongst coffee enthusiasts. The issue is people have a really hard time trying to figure out which set that they should try in their grinder. Number one, there's no way to try them before you buy them. You kind of got to go on the word of whatever people are saying on the internet, which there are varying opinions on each one of these. Also, the way that they're named can be very confusing, and also they're quite expensive. So you probably don't want to buy like 2 of them and then try and sell the set that you liked less used. You want to try and get it right the first time. Fortunately, I'm here to help, and I think I can give you a very practical guide on how to choose the right burr for you. Now, if you're looking for a deep dive on like actual particle size distribution graphs and that kind of thing, we're not going to go there in this video. Number one, those particle size analyzers are crazy expensive. And number two, we're learning more and more. There's a lot more to the picture with these things than just the particle size distribution. You know, grind shape has a very big impact, as well as just size when it comes to flavor. And just on the whole, I think that in many ways, this whole conversation is a lot more simple than that. These burrs were all originally sent to me at different times by the Zerno crew, who makes the Z1 grinder. Fantastic grinder. Got a review for this thing on my channel. You can also get these things through Cafune, and they're going to give you a 10% discount using the code and link down there below. It's one of the only places I'm aware of that you can get a discount on these burrs. They haven't sponsored or previewed this video or anything like that, but I wanted to share because it's helpful. Now, that is an affiliate link, so when you use it, it does support my channel as well. Just full disclosure there. So from left to right, on this side, we have the Brew burr. You might see it called the UMV1. This is in silver night coating. This one right here is the SSP MP or multipurpose. This one right here is the CV3 or cast V3. And this one right here on the end on the right side is the SSP HU. Now let's start with the Brew burr right here. This is one of the very earliest geometries made by SSP, and it was originally inspired by Malkonig grinders that were very good at making filter coffee. And this burr makes very good filter coffee. So pour over, batch brew, cupping, anything like that. I really enjoy this burr, and it is probably my favorite filter burr overall. Very clear, very transparent, good representation of the acidity, while also being very flattering and not at all punishing. You might say people say it's a little unforgiving. I don't find that at all. I find this is a very forgiving filter burr. Light body, but very smooth, nice finish, good flavor separation, excellent filter brews. And if all you want is really good filter coffee, this is the burr that gets my recommendation. Now, if you hear that and you think, oh, that might be great, I might like to try espresso with that burr. I'm gonna say in 99% of cases, this is not a practical at all burr to use for espresso. You're going to be grinding so fine. It's only going to work with certain coffees likely. It might not work with your setup at all. Just don't go there. Now, on the total other end of the spectrum, we have this burr, the SSP HU burr. And this is a espresso focused burr. While the Brew burr is very unimodal, all the particles are going to be very close to the same size. This burr will create a lot more fines. That's little tiny particles in your coffee grounds that will bring more body and more blending to your espresso. It's also going to make it easier to pull to give resistance to the puck inside an espresso machine. Would not recommend this burr for filter coffee, but as far as espresso goes, generally very tasty, very flattering cups. We will come back to that. Now that leaves us in the middle with these two burrs. The multi-purpose burr and the cast burr, the V3 in this case. And the multi-purpose burr, you'll probably notice it looks a lot like the Brew burr aside from the color in this case. And that's because people really liked the coffee that the Brew burr presented, but wanted it in a way that was a little bit more accessible to be able to build pressure and produce espresso. So they modified the geometry a little bit. It creates more of those fines, those little tiny particles kind of in the mix there, while still providing good clarity. You might consider, what did they do to have to compromise in order to get that result? And there actually are some compromises here. When it comes to filter coffee, comparing the multi-purpose burr with the Brew burr, I would choose the Brew burr hands down every time. I find the changes that were made to give more fines for an espresso use case on this can bring a little bit of an edge and a little bit of a stringency to your filter coffee. Also makes it way less forgiving overall. When you first take a sip, the presentation is very similar, but then there's an edge that can come afterwards. Whereas the Brew burrs have a very nice, very even finish. Then when you compare them to espresso, it does bring that more revealing flavor separation, a little bit more of a bite in a good way in a lot of times to your espresso. However, that revealing nature can also be a little bit of a double-edged sword. We will come back to that in comparison to the HU. What I will say about this burr is it does both espresso and filter coffee well. So if you're looking for a true multi-purpose burr, this is a really good candidate. Now this one, the Cast V3, is the newest one to the lineup. Very interesting burr. This one was originally inspired by the geometry of Ditting burrs. And the burr that preceded this was called a Cast V2. And they call them that because they're cast rather than CNC milled. The V3 has a casting phase and then a milling phase, so it's kind of a little bit of a combination. The Cast V2 was really good at filter coffee, giving still good bite, good clarity, but a little bit of a sweeter presentation. Some people would call them lab sweets. Nice complexity, a little less punishing at times. The CV2 didn't really work the greatest on espresso. So they made some changes to the geometry, released the CV3, trying to get some of that element on espresso. Now, when it comes to espresso and flavor, I actually probably prefer the flavor of the CV3 to this whole lineup. It's not too heavy, it's not too blended, it is somewhat of a flattering presentation. There is a really nice bite and intensity to it, a real forward element to the cup where I find the HU is flattering, but it can be kind of smooshy. This is really nice without being punishing like the MPs can be. The only thing with this burr is on espresso, I find it is really difficult to make it work on a flat profile pump driven espresso machine. You need to grind really fine. The sweet spot is really narrow. It's a lot more difficult to brew pressure with than I think a lot of people hoped for when this burr was released. I think people were hoping for the MP type experience on espresso, and you really need to go quite a bit finer. You really feel like you're riding a knife edge on a pump driven machine like the La Marzocco back there. Now, if I'm using something where I can modulate pressure, like the Cafe Lot Robot or another manual lever, something like that, for flavor, I would choose the CV3 probably every time. And on filter, also very nice, very favorable cups, good intensity, not as clear as the Brew burrs, but very nice, good cups. So that's a little bit of a snapshot. Now, how do you actually figure out which one that you should do? I'm gonna say that if filter is your only consideration, I would say probably the Brew burr. I just really, really like that burr. Now, there is another burr available that you can get, the CV2. That one can be nice if you're looking for maybe a little sweeter presentation, less clarity. Now, how do you choose if you want to do both filter and espresso? We're not going to consider the Brew burr because it's not going to work for espresso. And if you want that multi-use element, I'm actually going to recommend you not consider the HU. Some people use the HU for filter. I find it just doesn't do as good a job as the other two. So I'm going to say, if you want both, don't consider the HU. How do you consider between these two? And I actually have a really easy way that I like to think about this. If you're using a pump-driven espresso machine, I'm going to recommend the MPs. They have their compromises. They can be a little bit more edgy on filter. They're not quite as flattering on espresso, but they are going to be a lot easier to work with on espresso. And they do give you nice cups, just with those caveats in mind. So if you have a pump machine, I'm going to say MPs. If you have something where you can modulate the pressure, a lever, decent, something like that, something where you're a little bit comfortable riding a very narrow sweet spot and grinding very fine on espresso, the CV3s are really nice. But I'm going to say if you have a pump machine, you may have a frustrating experience with these burrs. In terms of actual grind size on the Zernos, just to kind of really give you a clear picture here, I found these shifted somewhat dramatically finer after, 1 to 2 kilos of coffee. If I'm pulling espresso with these, I'm going to be like 50 to 80 microns, and sometimes I'm still not going to be building a whole lot of pressure on these, especially with light roasts. So on a pump machine, that is pretty fine. Compared to the HUs, I find often I'm pulling somewhere in like 130 to 160 micron range. And the MPs, I often find I'm somewhere like 80 to 100 microns, somewhere like that. So you're really pushing what is possible if you're trying to use this burr on a pump machine. As good as the taste is, as good as the filter is, difficult to use, or at least more difficult to use than some of the other options. Now, I'm sure some people will argue that, it's just my experience. That being said, whenever I use something like the robot for espresso, this is the burr that I gravitate towards. The taste is great. If you just want espresso, filter is not a consideration at all. We need to bring the HU back into the picture. And how do you decide between these three? Well, let's assume you're working with a pump-driven espresso machine. So we're going to remove the CV3 from the picture and look at the HU and the MP. The MP had a lot of buzz around it. For a while, the HU was seeming to kind of like pass out of vogue on the enthusiast circles. I think the HU is in many ways like a goated burr. Like, it is just so good at doing regular espresso shots. And the best way that I can think of to make the choice between these two is to actually think of what happens when I serve coffee to my wife, Sarah, using one of these two burrs. When I use the HU, here's what happens. I serve her coffee, often doesn't even really matter what the origin is, what the processing is, wash, natural, light, medium roast, whatever. I serve it to her and she's like,
ooh, that's a good cup. That's a good cup of coffee.
The MP is a little bit more revealing, and it will bring out some things, both positive and negative, with a little higher degree of clarity. And often when I serve a cup of coffee to Sarah that's been brewed using MPs, she'll say something like,
it's good, but there's something in there that I'm not totally digging. What is that?
And to me, that kind of sums up on espresso the experience between using these two burrs. The HU pads a lot. It's a little bit more blended, a little bit more flattering, and a little easier to work with. The MP has a little bit narrower of a sweet spot. It's a little bit more revealing. I can see why some people would call it punishing, but it does give you higher clarity if that's something that you're looking for. Now, like I said, that can be a double-edged sword. And I would say if you just want a great tasting cup, as much of the time as possible, I would recommend you go to the HU. Very often you'll see people who like turbo espresso seem to gravitate to the MP. Again, I think that's just a preference thing where you're looking for a little bit more clarity. I actually like turbo espresso using both of these burrs. Again, that can be a little bit of a niche thing. So that's kind of my take on SSP Burrs. In some ways it's kind of simplified, but I think it actually can be simplified, just because you can go all the way down the rabbit hole on charts and math and distribution, the actual practical effect in your cup combined with the way that you want to brew these can actually make for, in many ways, a bit of a simple choice, at least to start with. And then if you want to get more than one, you can kind of go from there. So if you have experience with these burrs, whether it aligns with mine or whether it's contrary to mine, I would love for you to drop your thoughts down there in the comments, and that'll give people who are watching this another layer to kind of sift through to make their own decision when it comes to these things. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, do that, because most people who watch actually aren't subscribed, and it is the best way that you can support me making more of these videos as a content creator. I hope that was helpful. Let me know your thoughts on this down there. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.